Well, I'm Mark Grannis, and I am the Libertarian candidate for the House seat. I ran for the first time ever running for political office 2 years ago, and I found it a really eye-opening experience. One of the things that was most surprising to me was how little actual debate precedes our voting. And I think that's a shame, because it lets the ideas that we have about government harden. And when people are looking for reasons why debate is polarized and why it seems so hard for people to actually depart from party orthodoxy and embrace new ideas, that's got to be one of the reasons, is because we don't actually spend enough time thinking outside the box and deliberating as a community. My own personal platform is based around, it can be expressed in as few as 8 words: less government, more liberty, more prosperity, and more security. I can expand on that as we go forward, but the basic idea is that libertarians believe in a government that's small, not because we can't afford more, but because that's all that's good for us. A government that does what government ought to do should be small. It doesn't need to be large. And libertarians would cut much of today's government, not just to save money, not as a budgetary measure. We would cut it if we were flush with cash, because it's bad for us. Government should be limited to protecting our liberty, protecting us from violence, protecting us from theft, protecting us from fraud. It should not be doing all of the other things that government is providing. It should not be providing social services. It should not be starting endless wars. It should not be creating a surveillance state and infringing our civil liberties. So we're for less government, and we're for less government because the government that governs least governs best. I think if you look at the deficit and the debt, I'm concerned at a level of about 8. If you look at what the elected officials are saying about it, I'm concerned at a level of 11. The problem here is that people are unwilling to propose any way of actually dealing with the problem. And again, as I said before, we have more government than we can afford. We have it because people like to promise free stuff, and instead of making people pay for it so that we could have this trade-off and decide as a society what we want, they've charged the future. They've taken people who don't vote and aren't born yet and decided to send the bill to them. That's fundamentally unjust. It's unworthy of a very, very wealthy country. And what we need to do is get a handle on our finances and have people who will talk honestly. Until we have people who aren't career politicians, who are going into the government and taking a good look at our budget, we're not going to get that. Now, 2 years ago, I proposed a balanced budget. I balanced the budget in 1 year. It was for fiscal 2012. If you had elected a Libertarian Congress 2 years ago, we would be paying down our national debt right now, and the deficit would be eliminated. It's on my website. I would not reinstate Glass-Steagall, and I don't believe that Dodd-Frank solved the problem. The reason it didn't solve the problem is because what Dodd-Frank really says is there ought to be a law, and then it creates a bunch of administrative agencies to go off and decide what the law should be. Well, all of us stopped paying attention when that law was signed, but the banks didn't. And so those regulations are going to come out exactly the way the banks want them. Government, in practice, does not protect us from big business. It does not protect us from the banks. And so the notion that if we make the right rules, government will make it all fair for us is an illusion. In fact, what government does is protect the banks from us. And when they get in trouble, government writes a check with our money to bail out the banks. The free market had a solution to the economic downturn. The free market was ready to punish the banks that imprudently bought up all those mortgages, granted all those mortgages to people who couldn't afford them, and those banks would not be with us today. Would it have been a catastrophe? That's unprovable. There were well-run regional banks that could have supplied GE and GM and all those other corporations with the credit that they needed. It would not have locked up the economy. All we've done is add debt to people who don't vote and aren't born yet, and we've created a great deal of uncertainty in the economy that will dampen job growth. Well, Iran standing by itself is not a threat to our national security. Iran having a bomb by itself is not a threat to our national security. Iran having a bomb that it wants to use against us is a threat to our national security. And I think it's important to keep that in mind. Non-proliferation would be a fabulous thing if it were ever possible, but it's not. Never in history. The Hittites had a big time back in the 1000 BC because they invented the iron chariot wheel. Well, pretty soon everyone else had an iron chariot wheel. There's no offensive weapon in the history of man that hasn't eventually spread. And nuclear arms are the same way. I see no reason that we can't coexist with Iran the same way that we coexisted with the Soviet Union when it was a power. I think it's unfortunate, but our foreign policy for decades has been such as to encourage people to pursue nuclear weapons so that they can be taken seriously and treated as adults in the international arena. It's natural for Iran to want to have big boy status in the world, and we've done that. So we're going to have to find a way to live with people who disagree with us, even when they have nukes. Well, the best welfare is a job, but we have to acknowledge very candidly that the free market does not always produce full employment, and not everyone is capable of working. There will always be people that we need to take care of. I'm from a religious tradition that views that as not optional. That's mandatory. We have to take care of those people. But we don't have to do it through government. So I agree with the two gentlemen here that the welfare system that we have is not working, and that I think a government system is in fact doomed to failure for welfare, because that's not how it works best. It works best as private charity. That's how it was invented. Government didn't invent hospitals. Government didn't invent soup kitchens. This became a government problem in Tudor England when Henry VIII broke the monasteries. And then they had to figure out what to do with all those poor people because the church was taking care of them. What should we do from here? Where should we go? I think we need to return this to private charity that works better. We need to return it to the forms of social, civil society, AILs, mutual aid societies. There's a rich tradition of this which government has broken, and government needs to get out of the way so that that rich tradition of charity can reassert itself. Well, our schools have failed us, and the best evidence of that is that at budget time, a majority of Congress no longer knows the difference between positive and negative numbers. But I think there's no evidence that having a central policy in Washington has helped any of that. It's a big failure. The debate over whether schools are properly public or private, which is the better system, has gone on for at least 200 years. And there are good arguments on each side. And if we leave it open to local communities and to states, I'm quite sure that there will be some states in this country who want to keep doing it the way we do it now, and other states who would decide, you know what, a private system might be better. Why not let them do that? Centralizing it so that we all send our money to Washington, it takes a cut, stirs it around, and sends it back in different proportions, is a silly policy. And the one-size-fits-all educational policy that comes out of Washington is ridiculous. I have 2 kids. I don't send them to the same school. They're different kids. They need different things. We're not well served by a policy that tries to make every school good at preparing kids to study physics at Princeton. That's just not the only thing a school should do. We should have real educational diversity, and the only way you get that is through different people running the schools. The Department of Energy is one of the departments that I eliminated when I did my budget 2 years ago. About half the functions of the Department of Energy are actually military. They have to do with nuclear security, and that should be transferred to the Pentagon. But the rest of it is a complete waste of taxpayer money, about $30 billion a year, if I'm remembering correctly. It has had no positive effects on the U.S. economy. Government can't pick winners and losers in terms of which is the right alternative energy source. But more to the point, it doesn't need to. Is there any way you can think of to make more money than by inventing a new way of making energy? Coming up with a way of a new alternative to oil? How about if you invent the thing that's going to replace oil and coal as the main drivers of our economy? Don't you think you'd make money on that? The government doesn't need to dangle subsidies in front of people to get them to work on that problem. Capitalism will do that. There are people perfectly well incented to go ahead and pursue alternative energy now. And when the solar panels are good enough to pay for themselves, I'll join George if my town council will let me cut down the tree that keeps my house in the shade, and I'll put them on my house too. But it's all about what makes the cost-benefit work. Well, Social Security is not a difficult problem to solve. We have time to solve it. It is unfunded when you look out 75 years in the future, as the actuary is required to do. But we actually just started to go negative. The medical, Medicare and Medicaid are much worse. Medicaid, I believe, should be a matter of block grants to the states. Social Security, there's no real mystery about that. We need to raise retirement ages. But in the meantime, I think we should notice something else that's going. While the politicians bicker about privatizing these systems, people my age and below have privatized the privatizing. If you're my age and below, you're not counting on getting Social Security. You're already saving in a 401k. Now let's look at this as an initial matter. If we were starting over today, would we think that pension savings is something the private sector can't provide and therefore government must step in? Of course not. There are all kinds of people competitively providing pension savings today, and most of us rely primarily on that rather than Social Security. So again, this is an area where we need less government, not more. And we have to first stop thinking of government as the only possible solution to this problem. Well, I think most people believe Congress is corrupt because that's the only explanation that they can come up with for how it could be so bad. But there are other explanations, and as you get close enough to watch how the laws are made, you start to see the access, the careerism. I do support term limits. I do support redistricting reform. There are some good arguments. There are good ways to avoid the kind of shenanigans that we've seen here in Maryland. And I support fundamental tax reform. And I support all three of those things as a way of whittling down Congress's power to cater to special interests. But here's what it's really about. 3 words. Power attracts influence. If you have a government that runs everything, people will spend a lot of money to make the government do what they want. If you want the government to cater less to special interests and you want fewer people trying to buy members of Congress, give the government less power. Power attracts influence. When they're spending $3.8 billion, there's plenty of people bellying up to the bar to try and get special favors for them. Smaller government is going to solve that problem. I guess I'm going to answer your question with a question, and the question is, what color are yield signs? And I won't put anyone here on the spot, but if you're thinking yellow, you're wrong. Yield signs haven't been yellow in 40 years. They're red and white. If you're carrying around in your head an idea of a yield sign as yellow, you got it from something that you played with as a child. Almost nobody driving or voting today can remember a yellow yield sign in real life. Now, I think a lot of people vote that way. I think they have this idea of what Republicans are for and what Democrats are for, and some of them are Republicans because they think that Republicans are for less government, and some of them are for Democrats because they think the Democrats don't want to interfere with your private life, and the Democrats might be anti-war sometimes. Well, guess what? It's all wrong. It's wrong like yellow yield signs are wrong. You can't vote based on outdated perceptions that you remember from your childhood. The 2 parties that we have today are not your grandparents' Republican and Democratic parties. They've changed. They're both for more. They're both for bigger government. Sure, they want to boss you around in different ways, and they want to boss around different parts of your life. But they are fundamentally for the use of force against people who are not initiating force against others. The Libertarians are different because the Libertarians focus on the force and the fallibility. It's the force government uses against all of us, which drives the whole machine. It's the force they use when they take the tax money. It's the force they use when they criminalize business. It's the force they use when they prosecute people for victimless crimes. All of that is driven by force. Even when they seem to just be paying for something, it's force because they took the money from somebody else first. They don't make anything. They take the money and move it around. So Libertarians focus on that, and we focus on it in a principled way. We focus on it in personal affairs, and we focus on it in economic affairs. So if you don't like the power that is oppressing you, you give it to a Libertarian. We can be trusted with the power because we hate it as much as you do. If I could have this seat, if I could win this election and have the seat remain empty, it might be a fine solution. But barring that, I'm willing to go and make sure nobody else uses the power against us.